Hello, I'm Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about efforts to unionize college athletes. Arthur McAfee is an attorney in the professional and collegiate sports industry. Formerly, he worked at the NCAA and was staff counsel for the National Football League Players Association. A graduate of Morehouse College and Howard Law School, Arthur teaches in the Sports Industry Management Master's Program at Georgetown University. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're delighted you could come. Well, maybe if we could start with, why are students at Northwestern thinking about trying to form a union?
It's a very good question. I think it dates back to the beginning of time with regard to intercollegiate athletics. There has always been a push for the athletes to receive a fair compensation or value for the services that they're providing to the university through their athletic performances. And currently, the athletes through the Collegiate Athletes Players Association have started a campaign to obtain better benefits from the universities that they attend. They are also seeking to obtain better medical benefits as well. So in general, they're looking for more improved academic and social intercollegiate athletic life while they're on campus.
But do we need a union to do that, or why aren't, two-part question.
Yes.
One, do we need a union to do that? And two, why aren't the universities seeing this themselves and saying, you know, why don't we make the lives of athletes better for them?
Well, let's take the first one. Why is there a need for a union? Well, it's primarily, I think, the athletes over time have learned that they don't actually have a forceful or legitimate say in how their sports are governed, what impact the governance part of the NCAA or the institution has on their life with regard to practice, scholarship, and medical care. And so they have decided that in order to push the issue forward, that they needed representation or a seat at the table, as we all commonly now say, a seat at the table in order to push that agenda. The second part is whether it's good or not. The institutions themselves will see this as an affront to the current system. And so you will have pushback from the universities as it relates to what they believe they've been able to do. So the universities and the NCAA feel they're offering a great opportunity for student athletes to improve their lives through the admissions to the university, the opportunity to participate in athletics or an athletic sport that most student athletes enjoy. And so those two issues there are at the forefront of this issue.
Well, fair enough. Well, let's look at that a little bit more if we can, because clearly the students benefit in some way, right? I mean, it's great to be a student athlete, it's great to get a scholarship, it's great to get an education, all of which is terrific. But something is going wrong here if so many athletes around the country are saying, well, wait a minute, I don't have control of my schedule. I don't have control of when I can study. I have to go where Coach Jones or Coach Smith tells me to go. And so maybe I do need more of a voice.
Certainly. The issues there, I think, center around what type of control that the student athletes can take away from the administration, so to speak. And also to have the administration feel more compliant with regards to the wishes of the student athletes. And so what you would often see, student athletes will complain that there's not enough time for study. There's not enough food, I guess is what they call now, food insecurity is I think the catchphrase for not having enough food after practice, not necessarily having enough academic support. On the other hand, the universities will say, we have these great student services that are available to the student athletes that they may not necessarily take advantage of while they're here on campus. And so you would see that in many institutions, at the Division I level in particular, will have student life programs. They will have academic support programs including some tutoring. And then, under the current rules, there are practice limitations for athletes in their to participate in sports. And so there is generally a 20-hour per week rule currently. So there is still that push between the two interests as to try to come together and somehow to figure out what would be fair for everyone.
Well, this is interesting because if you compare like the Northwestern situation to the University of North Carolina, it seems to me that that's the opposite situation where perhaps the people at UNC did too much for athletes.
Yes, again, this is one of those age-old issues with regard to athletics and academics, not just at the collegiate level, but also at the high school level, where many people believe athletes get a break, they have too much support, that they don't have to do the work as regular students do. And I think the universities, at least through the legislation, attempt to control that, monitor that even more to make sure that the athletes are incorporated into the general student body of the university. And so we come to those issues again. There are oftentimes circumstances where university individuals or employees have been overzealous in their support, which leads to violations. And then there are other times where the universities have their appropriate amount of academic support, and student athletes prosper behind that. So it's again, we're in that situation where, depending upon what side you're on, you can see pluses and minuses for either side.
And you mentioned employees just a second ago.
Yes.
Well, let's think about that to compare, let's say, a football player to a member of the band or a cheerleader. Mm-hmm. Are they employees? Are they primarily students? Should we unionize band members? Should we unionize cheerleaders as well? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think what we're looking at here, the effort by the student athletes, they are looking for medical support. So for instance, there may be an athlete who was injured playing football. After he has finished playing football and maybe even graduated, or even the circumstance where he may not have graduated, the insurance benefits run out and they're no longer, and he continues to need medical care. And though that care may fall particularly on that individual or the individual's family. And so I think the athletes are seeking reconsideration of their status as students, where they would not then be qualified for workers' comp rights and from the state. And that's one of the pushes one of the things that they like to achieve, is that by changing the category to employees, they then have certain rights that inure to them as it relates to medical care. And that's primarily one of the big things that they're looking for.
Well, if I remember correctly, in the NCAA tournament a few years ago, didn't one of the players really hurt his knee tremendously and a bone came out of his leg or something?
Yes.
And who pays for the medical care for that student?
Well, generally the university has insurance and medical insurance to cover an athlete's injury. One of the things that has come to the forefront is whether that coverage is fully borne by the university. What, if any, coverage is required, or support, or financial support is required from the parents or the student athlete themselves. And I think there's some inconsistencies as to how each policy is with regard to a particular institution. And then you have what is called catastrophic insurance that the players take out on their own in anticipation of going pro, turning professional in their sport. And in that situation, they then take out a policy, they pay the premium, and that, in order to protect themselves from injury if they can't get to their goal, their dream in terms of turning professional in their sport.
And that athlete who bought that policy, I assume it would be against the NCAA regulations for somebody else to pay the premiums for them for that.
There are loans that you could take out to pay for that, yes. In general, the athlete is not to receive any particular benefit based on his athletic reputation. So I would believe that the NCAA rules would say that if he was receiving financial support to purchase that beyond his family members, that probably would constitute a violation of their NCAA regulations.
But that gets to what I find to be really interesting about this whole situation. So you might have a student who maybe is very poor, right, and is a great athlete and somehow made it to a big Division I school, and they don't have the money for that. And meanwhile, the university is making millions and millions of dollars in revenue from this kid's athletic ability, but he's not allowed to take money from a booster or a friend to pay for medical insurance to prevent him from having bodily harm or taking care of bodily harm.
Certainly. Well, that's part of the push for reform. And so you would see on one end, without the unionization effort, the NCAA saying that, look, we have evolved to the point where we understand that these issues are out there for student athletes and their family members. What we'd like to do is move into a category where we can provide these benefits. But the NCAA, we're going to talk about this soon, but under the NCAA legislation, we're limited in what we could do. We'd like to change those rules. And to do that requires a vote of the membership to change the rules. And there's been some pushback on that as well. And so now what we've seen in the last 4 to 6 months is that some of the major conferences, primarily because of the football program's interest in a Division I playoff to name a national champion, they have decided that through their conference alliances that they would like to provide certain types of benefits that don't exist elsewhere within the NCAA membership. So that's where they're looking to do from the administrative standpoint. The athletes say that's not going fast enough. What we need is we need it now. We have athletes who are currently suffering. We have athletes who lose their athletic aid towards the end of the year. And we'd like to see those scholarships be 4-year scholarships, or athletic related aid for 4 years for the whole term, so that even if I am injured, I can continue to receive my aid and continue to go to school, even though I'm not playing. So again, that's where the two sides are at odds at trying to work through this.
Well, let's assume that I'm a high school student looking to play a college sport. Can I figure out which university is going to keep my scholarship if I'm injured versus one that may not?
You can. I think it requires a little work. And sometimes high school students are at a disadvantage. They don't have the experience to ask the right questions to get the answers that you were seeking. So, but part of it is that many of the athletes are also recruited from the same region. So a particular institution will come to the same town and recruit athletes before. And so that would be an opportunity for a student athlete at a particular high school where universities come and recruit frequently. They would be able to ask their former teammates from high school, what do they do? Do the coaches award scholarships the following year? How many scholarships have been taken away or have not been renewed at the end of the year? So those are the questions that parents could ask. Those are the questions that the student athletes can ask. And there are a number of people that they can encircle themselves with to find those answers, to teach them what questions to ask.
And what's the relationship between, let's say, a basketball coach and the athletic director in terms of the fiduciary responsibility? So if a student is recruited and comes to the University of X, Y, or Z, and then the coach leaves, what happens?
It's an interesting question. So what happens? Typically, if the coach is under contract, they would have now negotiated to the point where the coach would either have to have a buyout if he's leaving in the middle of his contract. For the student athlete, his commitment is not to the coach. His commitment is to the university. So when you sign, we call 2 documents. One, typically the national letter of intent, which sort of commits you to the university. And then it is the scholarship offer from the university that you sign that commits the scholarship or the university to you. It has no relationship with the coach himself or herself. And So the student athlete then has to make the choice. I'm going to this institution because I like the academics, I like what they have to offer, I like the athletic program, and I also like the coach. But then there's always the question of, why are you truly selecting the university? And if you're going to the university because they have a famous basketball coach or a football coach, or you like their program, that becomes a motivating factor for your selection, and not necessarily the fact that they have a great communications program at the university. You like for a situation where the student athlete is choosing because of both. Can't say that's always the case. One may take more precedent over the other, but particularly when the student athlete's coach leaves in the middle of his term, the athlete is at that university and then subject to the transfer rules of the NCAA as it relates to what they can do after the coach leaves.
Well, fair enough. If we can get to the issue of Northwestern a little bit more, the irony, at least from where I sit, is that Northwestern is a very academic school. Very serious school. I've actually sent a number of students to Northwestern over the years.
Yes.
But it seems to me that the problem is even larger at schools that are far less academic than Northwestern, but meanwhile, it's bubbling up at Northwestern.
Well, I would say to you this, that the general overarching issue with regard to the NCAA and its legislation in terms of academic competition or balance is that they have set standards for all student athletes to be eligible. Each university selects their own students based on their particular criteria, but there are standards in which the athletes are eligible to participate. And so choosing an institution like Northwestern over another institution, say a state institution that won't have the same level of academic requirement for entry, would be, because they're under certain different criteria for accepting students. And so the goal here in terms of the governance is to try to bring balance to those two circumstances. And so the NCAA rules, or the membership's rules, establish minimum criteria to participate, and then a showing of gradual progress towards graduation.
But then you might have NCAA members at loggerheads with each other. So you may have a small school that doesn't want to push certain rules and regulations and others that do.
Certainly. Well, that's the beauty of the different levels of the NCAA structure. So at the Division I level, you have schools that are similar situated. They typically sponsor the same number of sports, 7, and when I say sports, it would both be for men and women. And they generally have close to the same budgets, athletic budgets that is, and then stadium size. And so there's this criteria which the universities fit in order to keep a competitive balance for either philosophy in terms of academic purposes or for athletic competitive purposes. And so you would have, for example, you would have a group of schools in the Big Ten. Those Big Ten institutions, even though they've expanded beyond 10 schools now, their membership generally has the same philosophy with regard to academics and athletics, and the same with and they're situated because of region. And the same thing will happen with the Atlantic Coast Conference schools, the ACC schools. And so they typically find schools that are similarly situated in their geographical region, a number of state schools with a few sprinkled in with a few private institutions that have agreed among themselves that this is what they were going to do in terms of academic standards, athletic competition, and what resources they're going to put into it.
Well, maybe if you could say a word or two about Division III schools.
Yes.
Everybody always focuses on the Division I schools, but there are quite a few athletes in the Division III schools, and obviously there are different terms and conditions, but maybe you could outline those a little bit.
Yeah, so the Division III schools, I think you may find that there are, it's less talked about, but I think Division III offers students a full opportunity to experience collegiate life. And so that going there, their schools are typically smaller. They don't offer athletic related aid to students who participate in athletics, but they have other ways of doing that in terms of need-based aid or academic aid and that Pell Grant aid, those kind of things. But they're grouped where they compete against each other. Competition is fierce. They have a national tournament. They sponsor, each university that is in Division III would sponsor at a minimum 5 sports for men and women each to compete in. And they will also be grouped in conferences in order to find competition in closely related in region and philosophically with regard to academics.
And has there been any kind of unionization effort on the Division III level as well?
There have not. The unionization effort has been pushed at the Division I level primarily, primarily because of the exposure that it receives and the revenues that are generated. So the revenue and the exposure from television helps push that interest at the Division I level.
Well, you've been a college athlete. You're an attorney specializing in the athletic arena. What advice do you have for students who no doubt ask you, what advice you have for them who are thinking about being student athletes?
Well, it's certainly commitment to time, and it's a question of balance. And you have to, we would have them, one, decide to attend an institution because they will provide them what at the time they think they need. And that would be, for the first part, academics. That you can major in what you choose to, that they have a great program for that, that the athletic component of it is there, and it is an enhancement to your collegiate experience. Now, there are some athletes at all 3 levels that have enough talent to move beyond the collegiate level and play professionally. And you can see that often in some sports like track and field. And as I tell my daughter is that it doesn't matter where you go to school, if you have the times to compete, you can compete at the right, at a national level. And then what matters is your time. And so if you have the talent, you should be able to move either to international Olympic caliber athletes as well as professional athletes, or can be developed at Division III schools as well.
So in terms of, let's say I'm interested in the Olympics, and I'm a swimmer, or whatever I do, and I dream about being in the Olympics. Do you recommend that a student then think about a Division III school because now they'll perhaps get more attention from Coach Jones or Smith?
Well, that's an individual decision. I don't know that I would recommend one or the other, but I would say to you that most athletes look to get the best training they can. And so they would, in the circumstance of an Olympic caliber athlete, I think their interest would be to find a place where they could best develop into that a better Olympian. Also find a place where they can achieve high academic standards or a place where they can develop academically for whatever career they're pursuing. The questions that they would need to ask is what kind of time do I have with regard to pursuing my studies versus the time that you would have and the commitment you would have in terms of having to participate in athletics.
Well, in terms of the athletics, what about if you compare the athletics to, let's say, the efforts to unionize teaching assistants? Mm-hmm. There have been all these efforts.
Certainly, yes. And I think there is I think you can distinguish those two things. And one is that there are two things. I know that there is the adjunct movement. The adjunct professors are looking to unionize and have so at certain institutions. And there are the graduate students who have attempted to unionize. And oftentimes what they have done in terms of the National Labor Relations Board or their rulings, it indicated that where the activity is primarily academic, those individuals were not, are not employees. Where, and in the circumstance where we are with the Northwestern case, the ruling essentially categorized them now as employees because of the control that the athletic department has over the the athlete's life on campus. The practice schedule, the travel schedule, what time you eat dinner, what time you go to breakfast, those kind of things are indicative of the type of control that the board would be looking at to determine whether you are under control of your particular employer. And so there may be some similarities there I think you can fall on either side of the table on this as it relates to whether that activity in and of itself is student-athlete life, responding to their instructors, or if they are behaving or responding to their coach, who's not a teacher in some cases, as a employee relationship.
Well, fair enough. We only have another minute or two left.
Okay.
Anything that you want to share before we say goodbye to our viewers about either the Northwestern case, unionization cases generally, or kind of efforts to encourage more students to take academics and athleticism together when they're looking at colleges?
Yeah. This is a huge issue for athletes. And what should not be lost in this is the effort to achieve better benefits, as well as also obtaining the right to put themselves in a position to earn their degree. I understand that that's part of their push. For others, I would say if the unionization does not occur, there are efforts with regard to from the current administration to improve student athletes' life. One other thing is that having a union in order to achieve these benefits doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get it. And so what will typically happen, and I would say to you, is that the effort to unionize gives you a legitimate voice to negotiate to improve your benefits. It becomes one avenue in which to continue to put pressure on the universities to provide those better benefits. When you reach the collective bargaining part, you have a union, you have management, you could still negotiate, and we could end up in the same spot we're in now. So we wish them luck in their efforts. We also wish the athletic administrators their best in terms of providing the right benefits for their athletes.
Well, fair enough, and we wish you the best and continued good work.
Thank you.
If you would like additional information about Arthur McAfee, please visit scs.georgetown.edu. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.